All right, I am here with Tina Greenbaum. Tina is a keynote and TEDx speaker, psychotherapist, and trusted peak performance advisor to entrepreneurs and executive teams. Over the course of more than 4 decades, she's advised all kinds of people, from Silicon Valley executives to entrepreneurs, Wall Street bankers, athletes, artists, Emmy Award winners, and more. The insights from her book and brand, called Mastery Under Pressure, are designed to help people tap into inner emotional strength, deepen their relationships, and holistically transform their personal and professional lives for good. She does this both one-on-one and in group settings. She's also a host of the podcast Under the Hood, which gives an inside look into the lives of high performers. Tina, thanks for sitting down with me.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Now, full disclosure, you and I just started working together recently. And, through the course of our conversations, I just realized that, you have such a wealth of knowledge to share, more tof 40 years doing this type of work. And so I figured we sit down and kind of dive into some of the ways in which you can help people and some of the stories you have from your storied career. One of the things that stuck out to me and it was a funny realization during our conversations was that, there's a lot of people out there that are, they say that they coach people on peak performance, that they coach high performers, right? But people who are in those positions where they need to be at their best to get stuff done, sometimes they don't think of themselves that way. Internally, they may feel like they're just barely holding on and keeping it together. So can you share a little bit about why that is and how those people can make a change for the better?
It's such a great question. I have a quiz, and on the quiz, it has from 1 to 10, where do you think you are performing? And what I can see from the answers of the quiz, most people are really high performers. And then when they rate themselves, they say like a 4 or a 5. So it's really interesting. I think it's that part, and I don't know if you can relate to it, but I certainly can. I always like a challenge. And I'm always wondering, am I really kind of living up to my potential? Am I doing the best that I possibly can? And so I'm always reaching my standards for myself. And again, a lot of the people that I work for and work with, their standards are very, very high. Sometimes a little too high, sometimes unrealistic. And I don't mean too high that it's not okay to kind of reach, but they have a certain expectation that may be unrealistic. And I always say, when your expectation is over here and your reality is over here, in between is frustration and disappointment. And I think this holds for that particular answer. And it also holds for why we get so upset with ourselves, why we get so frustrated, why we get frustrated with a situation, because we have an expectation that it's supposed to be different than it is. And I always like to say, let's see if we can come back here. And what's the evidence? What's the truth? What's really, really happening? So for a high performer, what's the evidence? Well, I've got, this position and that position, and I've done this, and okay, so can you take that in? Can you actually believe that that's true? Because other people see you perhaps differently than you see yourselves.
Yeah.
It's kind of the way I think about that one.
Yeah, that's great. That's an interesting balance about, you want to reach for something big, right? But you want to have those realistic steps in between. One of the things that stuck out to me as well with you is there's the Nike slogan, just do it, right? And I've also heard you say, well, there's more to it than just do it. And so, when it comes to somebody reaching their goals in a way that's sustainable and realistic, what do you see as the thing holding people back when they say, I know what I need to do. I can even maybe express what I need to do to get there. But when it comes to taking the action and making the things happen, there's something missing. I keep hitting up against a wall.
I think a lot of that is sometimes we don't know what's actually missing because we haven't had the discipline to be self-reflective enough and honest enough with ourselves without judgment. So I like to say that, mindfulness is a term that's kind of thrown around now, but it's a very ancient practice. And the definition I love to use is being aware in the present moment without judgment. So if I say that I want to do something and my behavior doesn't match what I say that, excuse me, what I want to do, I have to stop and ask myself, so what is stopping me? And there's some really good questions that you could ask yourself. So, what would it take for me to move forward? Oh, I don't really know how to do this, or I don't have enough knowledge over here, or I'm feeling like I'm an imposter, or it could be anything. So if we don't ask ourselves these questions, then we just end up, oh, I'm a procrastinator. Oh, I'm just really stuck. And we put labels on ourselves that then make us feel really bad, that then take us down another road, which takes us further away from the goal.
Yeah, it seems like a a downward spiral from there, right? That
Exactly.
feeds on itself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, I know you mentioned mindfulness and things like that. You know, you talk about a little bit about how your own journey in self development and growth ultimately was able to help you help your clients better. So can you share a little bit about your own journey there and overcoming your own challenges and what that taught you?
Well, somebody asked me one time, how old were you when you started to help people? I was in a workshop of it was, I think it was on compassion fatigue. And so we all kind of raised our, we kind of went like we were just little kids when we started to help people. So it's always been my nature, but I didn't really know how to be helpful. And many times I would get myself stuck, because I'm very big on social justice and, if somebody's getting hurt or taking care of the underdog, or so I had a very big mouth, and I get myself into a lot of trouble. At one time I was a teacher in a school where I didn't really like the way the administration was dealing with the kids, and I was very huffy and puffy and almost got fired, and so many things that I had to learn. I had wonderful parents. Actually, although my father was extremely difficult, he was very moody. So part of my own personal development was always learning how to be on alert. And I think anybody who comes from a household where there's a lot of ups and downs, it wasn't a lot of fighting, but he was difficult. So he was my greatest challenge, because my father was very much, you're going to do it my way. And my personality is, no, I'm not. I'm going to do it my way. And so we would get into these battles of wills, literally battles of wills. And my mother was a peacemaker. My mother was actually a natural born therapist. But she also didn't have the skill that I have since learned of how to really help people in a way that makes them feel good about themselves. My mother didn't have a mean bone in her body, but she was a master manipulator. And so many of the things that I would bump into situations, bump into relationships, bump into feeling badly about myself, just a lot of areas where life just wasn't working the way that I wanted it to. But I always had a curiosity. And I think this is the piece when we look at how we end up in a certain field or a certain profession, the one that you're in. I know that you're a beautiful writer, and the writing comes easy to you. It's just kind of a natural thing. Well, helping people comes natural to me. I can kind of see the problems way ahead of time, and I feel like I've been very gifted and given an intuition that I don't know where a lot of times where half of the stuff comes from. Just kind of comes through me. So I think the epitome of, I was in one training right before I ever went back to graduate school. I was a teacher, and I really didn't like teaching elementary school kids. I always wanted to be a teacher, and I thought I hated teaching. No, I really love teaching. I just didn't really like teaching the elementary kids. And I didn't like being stuck in a classroom, where I couldn't go out. I couldn't be on my own schedule. I couldn't do all these things. So I went to this personal growth training many, many years ago, and I had no idea what happened to me. They started asking all these questions that would get under the conscious mind. Now, again, I had no language for this. So, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? Over and over and over again. What do I want? I hate my husband. I hate my life. I want a divorce. I mean, it was like, it came out of like nowhere. So it was pretty scary. And it was also really like, what happened to me? And so that was what drove me back to graduate school, because I wanted to understand what happened to me. How did I go from thinking that I had this wonderful life and, beautiful home and we were fairly comfortable, and then to this point where I've just this rage, unbelievable rage was like coming out. So I have a cousin who's a therapist, and she said, "Oh, I know exactly what's happened to you." I said, "Well, I'm glad you do," because I don't. So that was really the turning point of my interest in personal growth trainings. How did this happen to me? What happened? Uh, how to create a safer environment, because the way that training was, it was like the Wild West, in the 70s, and they were called T groups, and um, so I really kind of was in one of these trainings, and again, my big mouth, I kept asking this guy, like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that?" He turned around, he was so mad at me, and he said, "What do you want to be, the goddamn trainer?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I think I need some training." But I also made a promise to myself that day, because that man was very insightful and he had a lot of power. He had a lot of power over people and their psyches. And I said to myself, if I ever am privileged enough to be in the position that he's in, I will always do it with love. And I really never went back on that. Really kind of understanding how people feel, and how to talk to them, and how to really kind of talk so other people can listen, and that I can be a better listener. So that's just kind of a short, the short version. I ended up getting a divorce many years later. I stayed in that marriage because I had two kids at the time. We had a third. I couldn't break up my family. I just couldn't do it until I was ready. But I never stopped my personal growth, and that was the piece that really kind of gave me the the courage, honestly, to have the right to go out on my own, and I kind of never looked back.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think, when you were talking about, certain things from your past, you were making the connections and what you were bumping up against. And something that I thought about that I've also heard you say is, all behavior has a positive intent, and the mechanisms that we have are self-defense, right? Or something along those lines. Maybe you can help me clear that up a little bit. But if you see people bumping up against those walls, or self-sabotaging, or they have maybe these things simmering under the subconscious, in the subconscious, that it comes from it's not, someone may have shame around that and be like, I'm behaving this way, and I'm ashamed of it, and then that creates the spiral. But in reality, what you're saying is that it's more about self-defense, and that it's trying to protect you. Do I have that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to think about. I heard not too long ago, and it's been proven over and over and over again, that we create our belief systems by the time we're about 7. So all the biases and all the things that we think that we're so right, and things that we think about ourselves, we form at a really, really early age. And so if those decisions don't get re-examined as we get older, we walk around with a 7-year-old kind of psyche. You know, I'm right, I have to do this, I have to do that. And so children, and I think this is a really important fact, children have this thing we call magical thinking. So if I think it, I make it so. Now let's just say that you come from a household where there's a lot of fighting and whatever is going on, that you as a child know that something is wrong. It feels bad. We don't even need the language, just the energy of a household where there's a lot of anger or kind of hurt. It goes inside. It goes. So what a child frequently, I mean, let's just say that they have a parent that's drinking or something like that, and or the father or the mother is mean to the other parent, and I hate my mother, I hate my father. Oh, no, 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 I can't do that, because if I hate them, something terrible is going to happen to them. If something terrible is going to happen to them, it's my fault. because I wish that they were dead, or I would. So children make up story. It must not be them. It must be me. If I were only better, if I were only prettier, if I were only a better student, if I were only blah, 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 blah. And so we grow up with these stories, this, what we call it, narrative therapy, whatever you want to call it. We make up these stories and then we live our lives as if they are true. And then what we also do is we continue to create evidence. See, that went wrong. It must be me. Oh, why does it always happen to me? I'm the one, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And
it seems to me, sorry to cut you off, but it seems to me that this happens so early in life that the programming is there and you may not even be aware of it.
Oh my goodness, you're not aware of it. 9 times out of 10, until life begins to start to give you, just like it gave me, and I came from a relatively, stable house, a very stable household. Yeah, we had our ups and downs, but that was a good household, relatively, And so for all the different things that go on, and there's nuances, we talk in trauma, there's big T's, like really, really big, terrible, terrible things that happen in family. And then there's a lot of little T's, a lot of little hurts, not necessarily even from our parents. I was just talking to a client yesterday. We were talking about 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. Girls are mean at that age. Boys are mean too, but girls are really, really mean. And we hold on to these things. It was a woman who was a tennis player, an awesome tennis player. Anybody knows anything about tennis? She's a 4-0 player. She's a beautiful player. And yet she has this voice when she's competing. You're not good enough. You're going to double fault. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. So we kind of traced back, well, how old is this voice? By evidence, you are clearly a really good player. Why, what's this about? Well, we traced it back and maybe 12, 13 years old, where she would make up these stories. She started playing tennis and again, it just kind of goes on and on and on. So over and over and over again, for all the years that I've been doing this, nobody escapes. There's nobody who comes out of childhood, no matter how wonderful and how good we feel about ourselves, without some questioning, some insecurities, some things that need to be adjusted. It doesn't have to be, and that's why a lot of times, Michael, when people say, oh, you're a therapist, there's nothing wrong with me. Actually, there's not anything wrong with you. You're perfectly normal. You just haven't had the education. And I really am a teacher at heart. I mean, that's what I do is, again, I had another woman who was a young woman, maybe 30 years old, who was from Romania and was a serial entrepreneur. I don't know how many businesses she had started and been so successful. And she said, yeah, my business life is really good, but my relationships really, really, I'm in this relationship. I love this guy, but we just fight all the time. Well, what was your experience with relationships? Oh, I was, born in an orphanage. I didn't leave there until I was about 4 or 5. I said, where would you have ever learned about what a good relationship is? Oh, I never thought about it that way. And so that happens over and over and over and over and over again. And one of the other things is people are always afraid that if they start to look inside, oh, I'm going to find out these terrible, terrible things about ourselves. No, even with that rage that I found, it's not like I didn't know it. Underneath, it was just really kind of opening up something that I hadn't been willing to admit, because if I admitted it, then I had to do something about it.
Right.
I wasn't quite ready to do anything about it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think with mastery under pressure, a big part of your brand, from my perspective, is that the peak performance aspect of it is that you don't just help people dive into the past, but also give them tools to equip them for the future and for what to do now, what to do in 1 year, 5 years from now, right? One of the things that I think is interesting about you is that You like to, as you've put it before, get below the neck. I remember you saying that, in your, some of your earlier days, you were thinking so hard through a problem that you would get a headache, you think, okay, if I just think hard enough about this, I will eventually find a solution, when in reality, the solution might be found in the body. And can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have two aspects, two parts of us. One is our logic, our thinking brain, and the other is our emotional brain. And there is, in fact, it's called the vagus nerve, a nerve that goes from the gut, through the heart, goes straight up to the brain, to the part of the brain that's always on alert, that's always kind of, again, looking for danger. And so in our culture, in Western culture, we're taught to think, we're taught to use logic. Like you said, if I think hard enough about it, I should be able to come up with a solution. And yet I'm not, or I'm not doing anything. So what I learned through a lot of my training, and it started out with when I was working with women with eating disorders, they were really smart. They would say all kinds of things, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, they could tell me all about their past and the histories, but they weren't changing. And so I'm a change agent. What am I missing here? So my traditional psychotherapy training was inadequate. And I just knew, again, intuitively, that somehow or other, if I didn't get below the neck, then they were not going to change. But I had no clue how to do that. And I tell this story in my TEDx talk, that my first clue was at a yoga class, where I just got into that deep state of shavasana, that deep relaxation. Oh, wow. If I could only get these young women to do this, then maybe they wouldn't need the eating disorder. And that was really the trigger for the rest of my career, because I wanted to be successful. Again, I said earlier, I like challenges. I like to be the best at what I'm doing. And so I just started to go on a discovery that I would be sitting with somebody, like I was sitting with somebody who had been in a car accident. She was telling me about the car accident, and she was telling me about it. And every week she would come in and we'd talk about the car accident. And I said, there's something else that I need to know. And I didn't know what it was at the time. I just knew that there was a skill that I didn't have. And as has been my experience in my career, the next day, I'll get a brochure in the mail or something that'll say, and it was called EMDR, it was called eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And it's a trauma strategy technique that when we have a traumatic event and we don't process it. So let's just say that you go to sleep, you have a bad day. Okay, something happens. You go to sleep at night, you wake up the next day, not so bad. So the brain has actually processed that event, and the next day you wake up and it's different. You have a different view of it. But in traumatic memory, if it doesn't get processed really within the 24 to 48 hours after the event, it has the potential, not always, but the potential to go into long-term memory where it sits frozen. And that's what PTSD is. Post-traumatic stress disorder is, it's just frozen. So people who have had serious PTSD, it's as if the thing is happening over and over and over and over and over again. So I started to get an understanding that this thing that she was talking about, this car accident, was stuck. And somehow or other, we needed to process it. And so that was one of the first trainings that I took, where you take people through eye movement and you stop. And what I got was the appreciation of the bigger mind finds the answers. I'm just a conduit. In so much of the work that I do, I'm just the trigger. I'm just the one that gets the movement going, like, hey, let's just look over there. And then your intuition, your mind, begins to start to connect the dots. So when we're just in logic and we're just in mostly the left brain, it's very sequential. It's linear. This and then this and then this and then, but that's not the way the emotion lives. Emotion is very much connected to the right side of the brain, And when we get into a deep state of relaxation and we change the brain waves, which is why hypnosis is so frequently successful, because we're right in between awakeness and sleep, where the mind is much more open and the brain makes the connections. Oh, I could do this. Oh, isn't that fascinating? Okay. Which, so little by little by little, I started to go after any training that I could find that would take me under the conscious mind. And that's where I think a lot of the training, we had talked about this before, I coach, and the therapy piece and the training and all the trainings that we have to take over the years enabled me, I believe, to go like AC/DC. Is it something that we need to think about to bring in the logic, or is it something that we need to find in the body, which will then start to give us the clues as to where some of the origins are of this stuff? And as a therapist, I like to say, and therapy has a bad rap because a lot of therapists spend a lot of time in history. And if it's valuable, I'll be there. But I always start in the present. What's working, we don't need to touch. This is good. We're going to stay right here. But just like with that tennis player, the answers that were so quick, it wasn't anything that we needed to spend years and years back in her adolescence. It was only a clue. Oh, that voice is 12 years old. Well, I'm not 12. I'm in my 40s and I'm a grown up now, and that's an old voice. And thank you very much for telling me that I'm going to get a double fault, but you're not helpful right now. Let's put you on a shelf. And again, what I did with her yesterday was just really giving her some skills. What do we do with that voice? Well, could you put it in a box? Could you put it in a shelf somewhere? Could you do something with it that compartmentalizes it so it doesn't bleed into your performance? Because again, there's a lot of skills that people can learn, and that's where mastery under pressure just kind of came from. My kids were very, very competitive soccer players, and one went on. He could have been a professional player had he continued on that path, because he had the ability to do it. So we were always, I used to say I don't know a lot about soccer, but I know a lot about psychology. And when you're in front of the goal and you have a penalty kick and the entire tournament depends on you getting this penalty kick, I don't need to teach you how to kick. You know how to do that really well. I need to teach you how to focus and where to put your focus, because theoretically you should win, because that goal is way bigger than that goalie. Right? So having the mental side to be able to pull that off is kind of an example of being in a situation where you can only focus on certain things, and as soon as you bring something else in, like I might miss this or my team's going to be disappointed in me, now you're gone. Now you have taken the 100% ability to focus. Now you've only got maybe 50-60% to perform. So I love the practicality, and I think that's kind of what makes me a little bit different also. I'm very practical. Yeah. Everything that I teach, is logical. When you understand the emotions are a different language, but they also have their own logic. And when you have the emotional side and the logical side, you got a winning brand. And I always say, if you have two people that are side by side with the same level of education, same level of skill, and this one has a mental game and this one doesn't, this one's going to win. It's like, why wouldn't you? So it's kind of like, for me, it's like, duh. Right. Why wouldn't you want to learn this stuff? Really?
Yeah. And if you take that, penalty kick soccer example, you can extrapolate that obviously out to different domains of business or the arts or different areas like that. Have you ever had an experience with someone who they were trying to work through things logically and they kept hitting walls, and then once they kind of tapped into that, that larger brain, as you said, that it either helped them increase their income or help them perform better or anything like that? Is there a story come to mind
Yeah. One of my favorite stories, and he'd be happy to say it as well. A gentleman who was a CTO of a cybersecurity company, and I had met him at a networking event. We were just talking. It was actually a women's event, and he was one of the only men that were there. So me being me, I went over to talk to him. I was like, what brought you here? So anyway, we had a great conversation, and we corresponded periodically. And then he wrote to me. He said, I just got this new job, the CTO job. It's a really big job, and I'd like to hire you to work with me. And so his biggest issue was, and we only had one person who was higher than him, which was his CEO, because other than that, he was high up in the C-suite. He said, my biggest problem is when my boss criticizes me, or I take it as criticism, or he gives me feedback, I just want to crawl in a hole. I feel like I'm 12 years old or 10 years old, or actually he didn't say it at the time. He said, I just feel really small. And he said, my boss never knows it because I'm really good at hiding it. But I would love to be able to kind of stand there and more be his equal and have an adult conversation and not feel like I'm a kid. And that was really what we call his presenting issue. So again, so what kind of household did you come from? Well, Greek immigrants. What was it like there? Well, the A minus was never good enough. It had to be the A or the A plus, or education was really stronger. So there was this constant pressure when he was growing up to perform at this high level. So he would be one of the people that we would talk about that would say, you'd look at his skills and you look how he feels about himself. There's a great disparity.
On paper, he's got it all, but he's internally, there's something wrong.
He would just cave. And so it didn't take, again, a lot of work around identifying it and naming it and putting it in context. And then comes, and I think you wrote something with me about, I call it the 3 I's in terms of, transformational work. So first is the insight. And a lot of people think that that's everything. Oh, I know just where this comes from. Oh yeah, I have this kind of family, but great. All right, now we have that information. Now what are we going to do with it? How are you actually going to change your behavior? Because the behavior change is the hard part. It's the part, like I say, like you have, 2 shoes on 2 different feet and we're putting them on, and now when I'm telling you to walk, that's what behavior change is like. It's trying something new. It feels scary. It feels different. It's not comfortable. So that's the implementation of the kinds of things that I teach. And, in Mastery Under Pressure, I teach focus, relaxation, dealing with negative self-talk, how to visualize, and dealing with fear. So these are common human experiences that when we learn how to master each one of these pieces, that's what the peak performance is about. So we have the insight, and now we're implementing new behavior. So Michael, if you say to me, I'm a writer, and I sit down, and sometimes I just can't think, and oh God, and you get really mad at yourself, and so we have techniques for that. We have ways for you to think about yourself and what you're doing. Sometimes to just walk away. Let the big mind do the work. Come back. I mean, in peak performance, there's a whole series of things. A lot of times we think that it's just like, what just happened to me? I was just in the zone. I don't know how I got there. It was like this experience that I'll feel like I never have again, but we know how to get you there. There's parts of the brain and chemicals that go off when you're doing this and when you're doing that, and how to utilize this knowledge, really. So now we're implementing, and over time, it's practice and repetition, just like you're that athlete, just like that you're that speaker, just over and over and over again, until It's integrated, and you have actually created new neural pathways. So we can't think our way to just do it. And that's where the Nike thing, we have to do it. We have to have the experience, and then we have to evaluate it and come back. And this tennis player that I'm telling you, this woman tennis player, I'm working with her and her 14-year, I guess he's 15 now, 15-year-old son. They're kind of working side by side together, working through mastery under pressure. They're both
Very
tennis
cool.
players. And this kid is like knocking it out of the ballpark. I mean, he gets it. He's got it. You know, he just told me yesterday, he says, I won this match. The guy was much better than me initially, but we, in 3 sets and a tiebreaker, and I beat him 11-7.
Yeah,
This
that's great.
stuff works. It
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think in that process, where you do have to dive into that subconscious, you have the insight, you start to implement, and then eventually it's integrated, those 3 eyes. You've all, talked about the importance of having a mentor to help you see the blind spots, help you keep you on track. How important is that to have somebody by your side as you're working through those things?
I think, honestly, it's near impossible to do alone because we have our blind spots and they're so subtle and everybody else knows them. One of the insights that somebody said to me, again, I've done many personal growth trainings. I'm kind of a personal growth junkie, a spiritual junkie. But this woman said to me really early on, she said, "You're always looking for approval." And it hurt, when she said that to me. Again, she was in a position of being the trainer, and by being in this training, I had given her permission to share these things with me. And I started thinking about, and and the word going around was approval suck, approval suck. You're always looking for approval. And I never would have put that name on it, but the truth was I was always looking for my father's approval. So at some point I was able to kind of put those 2 things together. And then my experience with authority, and there's so many things that go on. Again, when we're talking about our childhood, how we respond to authority. Again, I married somebody who was like my father. I didn't have the insight. I was 23 years old. And the experience that I had with him and always working on eggshells and his temper, that's who I married unconsciously. And I always used to say in those years that I was married to him, I'd love to be able to make a more conscious choice as an adult. And so I've had fabulous teachers, mentors, teachers, some therapists, some different people, different walks of my life, but I never could have done it or been where I am without it. So the willingness to put yourself in the hands of somebody that you trust, because trust is everything. If you don't trust the person, you're not going to be able to really allow yourself, because you're always going to be on guard, and trust happens over time. Over time. I have one young woman that I'm working with now who is 24, I think 23, 24. I've known her since she was 7. I know her crazy mother and I know her history. And watching her blossom now, it is amazing, using all the things that I'm teaching her. And she's working really hard. And now she's in a serious relationship, and we're working with that. And going into business and doing all these. So she never in a million years ever could have gotten where she is without somebody like me. I'm not saying it's just me, but and I actually said to her, "What is it about our relationship that works for you?" She said, "Well, I've had a lot of therapists, and you're the only one who doesn't ever say I'm, bad or negative or anything about me, that you have been nothing but there for me." And so again, a lot of my clients, my older clients that I've had for a long time, they're like my kids. I feel like I've raised them. And and so that to do it alone, why? Why would you even want to? There's all kinds of help available, and there's so much out there. And the unconscious is unconscious by its nature. And if you don't have some way to make that unconscious conscious, you keep bumping into the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. So it's a shortcut. It's not like everybody needs to have a mentor. There are people who get through life beautifully without it, but they have somewhere, somehow, they have learned the things that they've needed to learn. Or they get to be my age, and through the school of hard knocks, you learn a thing or two. But that's why I love working with people who are younger than me and also raising kids. Because you raise kids with these skills and you really, really give them such a head start. You know, we're so interested in the math and the science and, well, what about the arts and the world of emotion? And so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. It seems it's not focused on enough. So when someone, people come to you in different situations. Maybe they're, struggling with addiction. Maybe they're struggling with those challenges at work or with their performance or, the stress and business, things like that. Going through challenges, whatever it may be, can be very personal, as you know. Maybe it's hard to talk about, maybe embarrassing, maybe triggers shame. So what would you say to somebody who, they know that they want to grow, they want to get over these hurdles, but they're hesitant to reach out because they think they can procrastinate on it, or they can shove it under the rug and hope that it goes away? What would you say to somebody like that?
Well, I like to think about, as I've said a couple of times, Michael, that this work is education. You go to school, you get your master's degree, you get your PhD, no shame in that. Actually, we walk around kind of feeling really good about ourselves. Unfortunately, mental health has had a really bad rap. People kind of associate mental health with serious mental illness. And I want to make a really clear distinction. Serious mental illness needs serious work and frequently serious medication. And even with a serious mental illness, with the right medication, one can have a life that is beyond anything that they could ever imagine. But it has a bad rap, right? So going for help is part of our, again, as Americans, and not just Americans, I mean, the Asians are even more of doing it by myself, that spirit of I'm going to do it all on my own, and I'm going to be really, really, really proud. You couldn't get the education that you need by yourself. Somebody is going to teach you something that you don't know. And it's the perspective, it's the way that you look at it, honestly. This is personal growth. This is self-growth. This is who could be more interesting than you, really. When we talk about, and somebody's going to sit with you and really kind of go over things. And, well, let's look at that. Well, how did you make that decision? Or how did you come to that? Oh, I never really thought about that. So it's engaging your mind in an intellectual pursuit, actually, but using just a different language. It's the language of emotion. Emotional intelligence now is, that's gotten really kind of, we know that people who are emotionally intelligent, same thing like I said to you before, if you have two people with the same skill level, this one's more emotionally intelligent, is just another way of saying what I said, is going to win. And people who are emotionally intelligent do better in their lives in general. They do better in relationships, they do better in jobs, they do better in everything when they have that edge that they can find their way around people. The pandemic put all of us on an even playing field. There wasn't anybody in this world that's alive that escaped. And it's the same thing with the human condition. Nobody escapes. Nobody. And in my estimation, as each one of us takes on this responsibility, because I believe that it is your own responsibility to take care of this part of you that maybe you didn't get the best childhood, you didn't, and my heart breaks for so many of these kids, but at some point, as an adult, you're in charge. We have to stop blaming our parents and really understand most of them did the best that they could with what they had. And once we stop blaming other people, and that's the thing that I hear all the time. I had somebody yesterday, a woman who contacted me. She's under a lot of pressure at work. She's a highly skilled CPA, and she's in a job where her boss is, kind of picking at her and micromanaging her. And, and I'm talking to her for a little while, and she's telling me about this boss. The boss is doing this. I said, the boss is going to do what she's going to do. What are you going to do about it? You don't have any control over her. You've got to figure out how you're going to manage you, because frankly, I get really bored hearing people blame other people because there's no power there. This is all about personal power and making choices and decisions for yourself. And if you don't do the work, then you become, which is exactly what I said to her, you become the victim. Yeah. And when you're a victim, you have no power.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap up. Well, I appreciate you sharing this time with me. It's clear that you have so much to offer for people who are the right fit for you. So I want to talk about that for a second, your offerings. I know there's different ways to work with you. You have your online course. You are going to be relaunching that at a price point of $2,000. People can find out more about that on masteryunderpressure.com. It's a 12-week self-directed course. Is that right? People can go through it over those 3 months, right? But then, if people want to get in touch and want to work with you on more of a personal basis, you also have other ways to do that. One of them being, one-on-one with you, right? The Mastery Under Pressure one-on-one, more of a hands-on approach. Can you talk about that a little bit and who you believe are good fits for that?
So I've kind of said through this conversation, I really like challenges and I like really big minds. I like people who have visions and feel like they're making a big impact or have the ability to make a big impact, even if they're not there yet. So that I believe that everything comes from the top. So if I can work with people who are in that position where they influence and impact other people, that's really my ideal person, because one-on-one is really great. And it's also in some way inefficient because we're only working with one person at a time. So if you're that person that influences a whole bunch of other people, then we've got a lot of impact.
A bigger impact, yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then I know you also do workshops. This can be for executive teams, for organizations, and you can do that either in person or virtual. Can you explain a little bit about the type of work you do there? I know you can apply some of those mastery under pressure principles, but you also have other things you can cover with people. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So I like to come into an organization and work with a team of people, again, helping them work with what goes on between here and here. There are other people who do other kinds of leadership things and team building and those kinds of trainings. I start with the individual and how they fit into the environment. So if you have a team of people, executive team, I've done work with a bunch of different organizations, universities, where we work together on difficult conversations. I have a really great topic on being an agile, emotional leader. How do we work with the position of what it's actually like to be a leader? I like to say, Michael, that every group wants a leader and every group wants to kill the leader off. It's a very, very tenuous position If you're too authoritarian, everybody wants to go against you. If you're too democratic, you never get anything done. So I like to say you have about as much room as a crease on a pair of pants. And so learning how to navigate your own personhood. And again, in this day and age, leaders can't stand behind gatekeepers. Your employees want to see you. They want to see you be transparent. And so this brings up a lot of stuff in people. So I've a great workshop on that. I also one on burnout, another one on women, competition, and power. And really kind of talking to women and a little bit their issues, which are a little different than men. Because as we know, and we've heard many times, that if a woman becomes too strong, we have names for her. She becomes too aggressive. How did we navigate that? So it's really the personal work that brings you into a relationship with everybody else. And this is the emotional intelligence building, so that you don't walk into walls, that you can really kind of, emotional intelligence is really about reading a situation. It's about having empathy, but also not getting lost in the empathy. Sometimes we confuse empathy and sympathy. I feel so badly for you that I end up feeling as bad as you do. And so again, so many skills to learn. So working together in a group. And some people say, well, I love to do individual because I'm embarrassed, but actually group work is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And we learn from each other in ways that you just don't learn as much when you do it in one-on-one, because you also get to see how other people see you in a group, how you're coming off to other people, how they respond to you. And then you get the opportunity to actually, what we talked about, implement new behaviors, new skills. How's this working? Because the other thing I think, Michael, that a lot of people don't understand, I mean, they sort of know, but not know, your energy is incredibly powerful and important. Many times you don't have to say a word, but when you walk into a room, people pick it up. So wouldn't you want to know what people are picking up, so that you can adjust it? And then coming back to something that I had said earlier, when somebody had said to me that I was an approval suck, what the work that I did is, that's not who I want people to see me as. I want people to really see me as somebody who is kind and helpful and a true friend, or, so I wanted my inside behavior and my outside behavior to be in alignment. So this goes back to our core values and some of the stuff that I do around belief systems. And does my inside self and my outside self match? Which goes back to a lot of the procrastination, a lot of the other things that I don't feel good about myself. So how can we get the two things in alignment, so you are the most powerful person and really bringing your true self to everything that you do?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and in those environments where you can kind of get that self-reflection through other people as well. It seems like, I know your workshops can be anywhere from 1 day to 4 hours to 2 or 3 days. It seems like you can get you can make a lot of progress in a short amount of time. Now, and then I know also you also, for the right people who may need continuing education credits, some of your content is eligible for that, right?
That's right. We're just getting certified with an organization that gives continuing ed credits to all kinds of different professions. So yes, you can ask me about that too.
Okay, great. Yeah, and then so best way to reach out about some of those more personal work with you is going to be your email address, tina@masteryunderpressure.com. And then, I know people can write into you and kind of share what's going on with them right away. Or if it's easier for you, you can just send one word in an email, and that's mastery, and that'll open up the conversation with you, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Tina, I really appreciate you taking the time, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Michael.
Thank you. Bye.